So now we're on Daf Daled Amid Beis. Umar Sovar, and the Chachamim that require b'fanei nechtam, even in the case of Molech, l'fisha ein edem mitzuyim l'kaimo. It's all a matter of crossing the borders. We're going to need to be Makayim and authenticate the two witnesses and their signatures, and we can't do it from one country to the other. V'hani lo nami lo shchichit. And therefore, even people who live in Eretz Yisrael, who certainly would recognize and authenticate the signatures of the two Eidim, because the get is originating in Eretz Yisrael, but nevertheless, when the get crosses the border into Chutz La'aretz, there won't be any Eidim available to recognize and authenticate the signatures of the Eidim. And therefore, according to the Chachamim, based on the fact that the that the Takana was because of Ein Eidim Mitzuyim L'Kaimo, they're going to require Fanei Nechtam, such that the Shliach will be Mekayim the get, even in a case of a get that originates in Eretz Yisrael. So it comes out that the Machlokas Rabbah and Rav about the Yisod of the Takana Fanei Nechtam is really Machlokas Tanoim between the Tanakama and the Chachamim regarding Molech, when the get originates in Eretz Yisrael and crosses the border into Chutz La'aretz. The Gemara rejects it. Rabba mitaritz l'taimei, v'Rava mitaritz l'taimei. Rabba mitaritz l'taimei. He's going to suggest that takana is because of the ignorance about lishma. The kuli alma lefi she'ein b'kin lishma. V'hacha. So then, what's the issue about a get that starts from Eretz Yisrael? L'chora there, they are b'kiyum l'shma. Why would the Chacham require b'fanei nechtam? And the Gemara answers, b'gzeras molech atu mevikom. If the reason the Chachamim are nervous about a get that originates in Eretz Yisrael is that the concept of shlichus works in both directions. And if you're going to make that distinction, ultimately they're going to mistakenly believe that a shliach does not have to is not required to testify fanei nechtam, even though the shliach brought the get from Chutz La'aretz. Tanakama Savar lo gazrida molech atu mevi, v'Rabbanu Basrai Savri gazrida molech atu mevi. So that's how Rabbah squares with the Chachamim by implementing the principle of gazrinan molech atu mevi. What bothers me about this Gemara is that I understand the Gzeira, but aren't we going a little bit too far? I mean, what we're saying is the get is possible. So a Shliach brings a get from Eretz Yisrael. We recognize that the get was written Lishma, but if the Shliach cannot testify to that effect, the get is possible. That means she can't get married. And why? Because next time, when the shliach brings a get in the opposite direction, they'll drop the requirement of fanei nechtam. In my mind, this needs a lot more study. I mean, it's really gzeira. And I'm happy to say that in the Masechet he tells you re'eh yalkut biyurim. You have to look in the more serious section of this Gemara. Rava mitaritz l'taimei kuli alma lefi she'ein edem mitzuyim l'kaimo. Okay, if ein edem mitzuyim l'kaimo, then I understand the Chachamim very well. Doesn't matter which direction you're taking the get, as long as you're crossing the borders, who's going to be available to Mekayim the Chesimus? And therefore, Rabbanu Basrai lefrushei taimei the Tanakama hu diyasa. In other words, even though the Tanakama did not say explicitly that it goes in both directions, he only mentioned Mevi, the Chachamim, in a later generation, they clarified the intention of the Tanakama. What he meant to say is Sai Melech, Mevi, and Sai Molech. In both cases, for the very same reason, you require fanei nechtam, namely ein edem mitzuyim l'kaimo, because you're crossing international borders.
Right.
I mean, here I would ask the following question. I mean, the language of Rabbanan Basroi sounds like, we didn't really understand the Mishnah properly until we got to the Rabbanan Basroi. They shed a light on the Mishnah and they avoided a misinterpretation of the Mishnah. I don't really comprehend, according to Rava, what was the Havamid, as we say, what would have been the possible logical misinterpretation of the Mishnah, and it should only work in one direction. I mean, there's no reason, if you're not going to find Adam to be Makayim, it doesn't matter whether he started here and ended here or vice versa. I don't get the Havamid. We had the Heilige Rabbanan Basroi. These geniuses in the next generation had to set us straight. I just want to see, by chance, if he adds anything here. I think it's number... Okay. Tanan. Maybe get me Medina 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 Sayam. Sarchlon Farinechta. So what happens if you have a country that is in Chutz La'aretz and it's divided up into provinces, right? You have Quebec and you have Ontario, right? So what happens if the shliach brings the get from one province to another? So again, let's go back for a moment to our Mishnah. Hamevi mimedina limedina. Okay, fine. Is tzarich sheyomer b'fanei nechtam. Makes sense. Actually, I'm thinking out loud, it makes a lot more sense according to Rabbah than according to Rava. Because Rabbah is worrying about Lishma, Ein Bekim B'Lishma. So if you go from one area of Chutzarts to another, that's right. I'm not sure, according to Rava, is it Ein Edim Mitzuyim L'Kaimo from one province to the other? I don't know. Then the Mishnah quotes Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Omer, Afilu me hegemonia lehegemonia. Wow. Imagine this reminds me a little bit of New York City.
Okay.
And tell me, Ira, if the same thing is applicable to Toronto. In New York, the city is divided into 5 different boroughs, and each borough has its own president and its own municipality. So, like, for example, if I live in Brooklyn, I have to pay taxes to the municipality of Brooklyn, etc., etc. So that's called hegemonia. In other words, 2 sides of the same city, but they're different legal authority in different parts of the city. And therefore, you know what? Again, this part is not so relevant to New York, but it could be maybe during, after 9/11, there was a time period where it was very difficult to go from one borough to the other. Could you imagine?
Right. Yeah.
I remember there were police lines, on the Brooklyn Bridge to go over to Manhattan. It was a whole ganze Sache. So it could be that since there's different, governmental bodies and authorities from one side of the city to another, and Rabbi Gamliel's worried, therefore, that maybe you won't be able to get Eidim to recognize the signatures. Again, that's all according to Rava. I'm sorry, all according to Rava. Yeah, Rava. So the Gemara says the following. Let's be medayik from the Mishnah. Habi osa medina b'medina sayom lo tzarech. So again, we're not going now according to Ram Gamliel. We're going according to the Tanakama, who establishes that Medina to Medina, like from Quebec to Ontario, or vice versa. What about from two cities within Ontario, from Hamilton to Toronto? Are you with me, Ira? Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure for a minute.
No, I'm here.
So the implication is that from one city to another within the same province, you would not require Fanei Nechta.
Right.
The Gemara says L'Rabba Nicha. That's good because we'll have people to be Mekayim the get from one city to the other within the same state. But according to Rabbah, who says we're worried about Lishma, and in Chutz La'aretz they weren't such Bekiyim V'Lishma, then even from one city to the other. Now, I'm a little bit bothered because I would think according to Rabbah, you'd have a problem within the same city even. Is La Rabbah Kasha? Gemara answers Lo Tema Ha Via Osa Medina Medina Sayam Lo Tzar. Don't derive that diuk that two cities within the same state do not require Fanei Nechta. Ela Ema Medina La Medina Be Eretz Yisrael Lo Tzar. So if Eretz Yisrael is divided up into three states, right? You have Yehuda, Yarden, and Galil, and if you bring a get from one Medina to another Medina in Eretz Yisrael, then all of Eretz Yisrael are considered B'kiyim B'Lishma, and therefore you don't need B'fanei Nechta. So the Gemara raises the following kasha. I don't see why the Mishnah has to give me a diuk when it's explicit in the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, maybe get Eretz Yisrael, Eino Tzarech, Lomar B'fanei Nechta. So the Gemara answers, if we were going to derive this halacha from that part of the Mishnah, at the end of the Mishnah it says, I maybe get the Eretz Yisrael, Eino Tzarech, Hava Mina Hanimili Diyevet. Maybe if the shliach already brought the get, and he did not witness the ksiva saget, you know what? We'll look the other way. We'll overlook this problem. We're not going to be mevatel shlichus and disqualify the get, but rather we'll be machsha the get so that she can get married. But if the shliach comes up front and he asks the chachamim, do I have to see and witness the ksiva and the chsim of the get? Lo. We're not going to tell him you don't have to see it. But l'chatchila, we're going to require that he witness both the ksiva and the chasim of the get lishma. But now that the Tana repeated himself in the same Mishnah that I maybe get Eretz Yisrael and Tzarach Lomar, Kamash Malon, he's telling me that even l'chatchila, the shliach does not have to see the ksiva saget. All right, then. So we got up to the Ika, the Mosiv Lahachi. Stop here, and I'll wish you a great week.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you. Yes, good.
Thank you so much. It's a very good introduction.
Yeah, it's
the
very
first
good.
5 blot
of
Masechet Gittin, because the Gemara talks extensively about the shliach who's bringing a get. So we got a little, and also we got Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Meir about the Fanei Nechtam, and about whether you need ksiva lishma, whether you need chasiva lishma. These are all very basic, fundamental concepts.
Yeah, that's good.
So, Mitzvah Hashem, this Thursday, I believe, we're going to begin Masechet Gittin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's yeah. All right
then.
Okay.